Start. Yeah. I'm going to start. Right, belated good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome on this autumnal evening in Edinburgh, and a warm welcome to anyone watching us on Zoom or YouTube. I'm Neil Martin. It's the first Friday of the month, and that can only mean one thing. It is the October meeting of the Astronomical Society of Edinburgh. So the lineup for this evening, I'll take us through some news and give us some insight into what's coming soon. And then I'll hand over to our guest speaker for this evening, Dr. Richard J. Goodrich, to tell his story about Fear and Loathing in the Heavens, the 1910 return of Halley's Comet. And then our own Nigel Goodman will take us through the sky in October, assuming that the weather changes. And then between Pat Clough, who's had the honour of judging the latest round of the Image of the Quarter competition, he and I will take you through the entries for the last quarter, which proves that not only do astronomers never sleep, they don't take the summer off. So starting with a little bit of news, subscription renewals are due as of the 1st of October. There is a slight increase this year for the first time in several years. The costs have increased, but we've tried to keep the pass on to the members to a minimum, so only a tiny increase, £32 for a full membership, and if you're in position of being able to take advantage of a concession membership, just £16. Still fantastic value for money, as you'll find out as we go through the rest of the events. Our membership is now up to 190, and this is our latest list of new members. Is there anyone in the room who is a new member joining us for the first time this evening? Well, nevertheless, I think we should put our hands together and welcome our new members in the usual way. And a small note, a welcome back to Jamie Shepherd, one of our former presidents. If you want to stay in touch with us, we have a huge digital footprint, both feet actually. Our website at astronomyedinburgh.org, Facebook page Astronomy Edinburgh, our X, formerly known as Twitter, ASE Edinburgh account, and of course, videos of all of our sessions, such as this one, stored on our YouTube channel. And finally, for the image-conscious ones among us, we have our Flickr group, where you'll be able to see not only the most recent Image of the Quarter entries, but all of the ones that have been successful, and some of the not successful ones in the past. So looking ahead, beyond this evening, we have three types of meetings running between now and the end of the calendar year. The Wednesdays after the first Friday in the month are our Imaging and Observing group sessions, and that's a members-only session. So you can see the next one of those is next Wednesday, the 11th of October, and they follow the pattern, as I've said, after the first Friday of the month. Thank you. Our mid-monthly meetings, the next one of those on the 20th of October, hosted by or with a talk from Mary McIntyre, A History of Women in Astronomy, and that's the first part of a two-part session, second part of which will happen early in 2024. Our next hybrid meeting, so the first Friday of November, the guest speaker will be Dr. Hernandez Santisteban, talking about supermassive black holes. Our mid-month November meeting is the rescheduled one from earlier in the year, with Les Johnson talking about a traveller's guide to the stars, the possibilities of interstellar exploration. And then our hybrid session in December, Search for Life by Someone Who's Done It by Richard Shaw. And the mid-December meeting, The Science of the Palomar Observatory, 1936 to present exploration, with Stephen B. Flanders. So that's all the things you have to look forward to as part of your membership. A small note for anyone who happens to follow us on Eventbrite. One of the things that's gone up a little bit is the costs for this service, and we've taken a decision not to use them anymore. So simply follow us on the website or Facebook or X Twitter if you want to learn a bit more about what's happening event-wise. And we won't be using Eventbrite. And as always, visitors will be most welcome. Looking slightly further ahead, it's a really exciting time to be part of the Astronomical Society of Edinburgh, because a week on Sunday, we enter our 100th year of existence. Thank you. And the first talk in that 100th year will be the one by Mary McIntyre. We'll have a few extra items on that evening. We'll talk more about what the plans are to celebrate this centenary, but we've already started planning and there's some activities ongoing. So it's a great time to be a member of the Society. So that completes my introduction. So without further ado, I will introduce our guest speaker for this evening, Dr. Richard J. Goodrich.
Thank you. It didn't swap. Yeah, it didn't like it. Yeah, we're not getting anything on that. The projector. Can we cycle the projector? Power off the projector and power it back on? No, it didn't like the swap over. No, it was working. It was working before. It was a work. Whoop. No, somehow when we pulled the HDMI cable, it didn't like it at all. Just reboot real quick. But it's not, yeah, I would expect it to go dark if it was doing anything. Good evening. Oh, it's always something, isn't it? I was at Nottingham last night doing this lecture, actually for them down there. And we were in a large gymnasium in a school and big bleachers. I don't know, they play basketball there or something. But they said, no problem, because we have this very interesting Britney Spears microphone that I can just roam the stage and talk. And 3 minutes into it, of course, it died. So, but this is good, it's back. My name is Richard Goodrich, and I have a lot of connection with this area here in Scotland, even though you'll be able to tell immediately from my voice that I'm not from these parts originally. But I did do my PhD at St. Andrews, so spent 4 years in Scotland. So it's not quite Edinburgh, but it's close. And tonight I would like to talk to you a little bit about some history. So I've sort of snuck in under false pretenses. You thought you were going to get an astronomy lecture, and actually I'm going to give you a historical lecture, but it's the history of astronomy, essentially, and how astronomy has played a role in our collective history. So we're going to be discussing the 1910 return of Halley's comet. And I wanted to begin with a little rhyme, a little bit of poetry. 8 things a comet always brings: wind, famine, plague, and death to kings, war, earthquakes, floods, and dire things. And so this was an old German school child rhyme. So if you're out playing at recess in Germany in the 18th, 19th century, this might have been something you chanted, and it expresses conventional wisdom about what happens when comets return. This one may be a bit more familiar to you. I saw and behold a pale horse, and its rider's name was Death. Revelation 6:8, a passage that many theologians over the centuries have sort of linked to comets in some way. So I want to begin tonight with a discussion of rationality. And I will warn you that even though I'm doing a discussion here about 1910, I am by training and academic discipline an ancient historian. So I work on late Roman history. And it is absolutely impossible for an ancient historian to do any sort of presentation on any topic without bringing in something from our classical past. And here we have 2 poles, I suppose, of the human experience. On the left side, we see Socrates, exemplar of rationality, the thinking man, the thinking person. And on the right side, Bacchus, the god of wild and crazy behavior, irrational behavior, we might say. And the question I want to begin with tonight is, are humans rational, or are they fundamentally irrational? Or rational in the good times and irrational when things start to go off course? And this was a pressing question in 1910. So pressing, in fact, that in April of 1910, the Pittsburgh Post, newspaper in America, did a point-counterpoint article, and they put 2 theologians from the city head-to-head, and one of them, Rudolf Coffey, was given the job of defending the proposition that humans are rational. His opponent, Reverend Albert Diefenbach, was given, I think, the easier case to substantiate the idea that no, in fact, we are rather irrational. So Coffey said, oh, I'm sorry, I missed the whole setup here. The setup is, what would humans do if they suddenly discovered the Earth was about to be destroyed by a comet? And this was a relevant question of the day, because in May of 1910, Halley's comet was going to sweep past the Earth. So it wasn't just an abstract question. People were thinking about this. So if a comet was to destroy the Earth or put in place any of your favorite cataclysms, would humans behave rationally, or would they revert to rather irrational behavior? Rudolf Koffei was very optimistic about the proposition that humans were rational. He said, with our advances in technology and science and our basic growing up as humans and civilizations, we have left behind our irrational natures, and we, of course, would behave rationally. If we all knew we were going to die on a certain day, what would we do? Well, we would behave like Socrates and calmly drink our hemlock and just lay down on a couch and wait peacefully for death. He said that religion would enjoy a renaissance, so the churches and the synagogues would all fill up, and people would turn their minds away from secular concerns and focus on eternal things, the things we should be thinking about anyway. This would sharpen our focus, sharpen our minds. He had a very optimistic view about what would happen. Albert Diefenbach, despite the fact that he also is a minister in the city, I think we could summarize his view in 3 words: stuff and nonsense. If we knew we all were going to die on a certain date when a comet struck the Earth, there would be chaos. People would go berserk. First of all, on the spiritual plane, people would hate God. What kind of evil God would create the heavens and the earth and then wipe out the earth in a fit of caprice? How could you trust a God like that? So that would not fill the churches up again. It would make people angry and hate God. And then society itself would quickly unravel. People would commit crimes, knowing they would not be punished. The police aren't going to arrest you and hold you in prison for several weeks for trial because there won't be any prisons left when the comet strikes. And so it would become a dog-eat-dog world. The powerful would prey on the weak. There would be mass rioting, violence, looting, pillaging. Everybody would be grappling to get everything they could for themselves in a great Epicurean bacchanalia. And he argued that in fact what would be miraculous is when the comet arrived, there were still people alive, because he figured most of the human race would kill each other before the comet actually even got here. Well, who was right? As I said, this is not an entirely theoretical question, because Halley's comet is coming closer. Halley's comet, as I'm sure most of you know, rotates or goes around its orbit roughly every 75 years. The period varies depending upon the gravitational influences of the major planets in our solar system, but 75 years is pretty good. Its previous pass had been in 1835. And one of the things that fascinates me is you think about how the world changed between 1835 and 1910. There was a huge scientific jump forward. In America in 1835, people were setting off for the west coast of the continent in wagons, covered wagons. In 1910, railroads knit the cities, and you could take a train across the continent. Automobiles were replacing horses and creaking down the roads. Wilbur and Orville Wright had flown, and by 1910, airplanes were becoming a more common sight. All of these things had changed, but had human nature changed? Well, in 1909, astronomers knew the comet was going to reappear in 1910, but nobody knew where it would appear in the sky and when exactly the first person would spot it. However, the betting money was on this man, Professor Max Wolf, Heidelberg University in Germany. Max was a master of astrophotography, so he'd gotten very good at photographing the night sky and superimposing images from different days over the star field, and thus he could spot objects that were moving. And he discovered hundreds of small objects flying around in space out there. So he was so successful with this that some of his colleagues, who were a bit envious, I think, said it'd be really nice if Max would take a couple weeks off on vacation and give somebody else a chance to discover something. because he's always discovering objects. But if you were a betting person, you would put your money on Max Wolf, and indeed, on September 12, 1909, he announced to the newspapers that he had spotted the returning Halley's Comet, passing before a very faint nebula, which had made it difficult for his competitors to sort it out. Once we knew where to look, astronomers were able to pull together some observations of the comet, and these were taken by a man named Frank Seagrave. He was an amateur astronomer and mathematician out of Providence, Rhode Island. And Seagrave had a special interest in orbits, so he was always calculating the orbits of different objects. And so he recalculated the object based on the actual observational data and put that out there on September 30th of 1909. So according to Seagrave's orbital calculations, the comet would reach perihelion, its closest approach to the sun, on April 20th, 1910. It would whip around the sun, and then on May 18th, 1910, it would pass the Earth, make its closest approach to the Earth, and it's going to pass 13 million miles away. The head of the comet will be 13 million miles from the Earth. Now, again, I know I'm talking to astronomers, and you have a very good sense of how far things are away, but in case anybody is not quite familiar with this, the moon's roughly 240,000 miles away. Mars is roughly 120 million miles away. And so it's not as far, or it's not as close as the moon, but it's much closer than Mars. So, but 13 million, that's a pretty big cushion. However, and this is the one that's going to be problematic for people, the Earth, when the comet passes, it's going to pass between the sun and the Earth will slide through the comet's tail. What will happen to us when we pass through the comet's tail? Well, I want to talk about 4 ideas that achieved some traction during this time, 4 reasons to worry. The idea that the comet might strike us, a direct collision. The idea of a universal flood, a cosmic death ray, and the possibility of tail gas somehow impacting us when we go through this tail. So let's look at this first one, collision. The possibility that the comet is going to collide with the Earth gets kind of a fresh gasp of wind here from an unfortunate interview with this astronomer, Father Charles Charapin. Charapin was a professor of astronomy. He was a Jesuit astronomer. He was a professor of astronomy at St. Louis, Missouri. And in late September, early October of 1909, he was traveling to Flagstaff, Arizona, to the Lowell Observatory. And there he was going to work with Percival Lowell to look for Martians. So he firmly believed, as did Lowell, that there were Martians active on the surface of the planet. Mars was at a very close approach to the Earth, so this seemed an ideal time for these 2 men to actually spot a few Martians moving around on the planetary surface, or at least evidence of them moving around. Well, while he was in Las Vegas, New Mexico, not Las Vegas, Nevada, the more famous one, he gave an interview to the local paper there, the Daily Optic. And in this paper, he touched on several topics. It was a 2-page story, in fact. And midway in the second page, he addressed the question of, will Halley's Comet or some other planet strike the Earth? And this is the reporter who is introducing this topic. While Father Charapin has no faith in the probable catastrophe of the collision of the Earth with other planets, still he firmly believes that when Jesus predicted the destruction of the Earth by fire, he had in mind such a collision. So, Charapin does not believe that Halley's Comet is going to strike the Earth, but he does believe sooner or later a comet is going to strike the Earth, fulfilling the prophecy that Christ had given about the end times. The story went on, and now we are quoting Father Charapin. If Halley's Comet, which is almost the size of the Earth, should strike this planet, said the priest, The impact would resolve both bodies into a great pyrotechnic display from which there would be no recovery. An event similar to that will probably be the final climax in accord with divine plans, but I do not believe that we need to worry about that just yet, as many of the prophecies of Scripture are not yet fulfilled. I do not want to be interpreted as saying anything sensational in this line, for that is not my meaning. So Father Charapin, in these quotes that were reprinted in the paper, is very specific. Yes, he believes that a comet, or possibly even Halley's comet, striking the Earth would bring in the destruction of the Earth and the second heaven and the second Earth. He's also very clear in saying that Halley's comet's not going to do it. Prophecies in Scripture haven't been fulfilled yet, so it's this theological argument. And until those happen, you're not going to see this cometary destruction. Well, this story goes out on the Associated Press newswire. So it's picked up from this tiny paper in Las Vegas, New Mexico. And the Associated Press writers kind of change it a little bit. I think you get the thrust right from the headlines, don't you? May wreck the world. Priest astronomer says Halley's comet may fulfill Christ's prediction. Yes. That the world is in grave danger of being destroyed this winter by a collision with Halley's comet, and that this catastrophe is what Jesus Christ had in mind when he predicted the destruction of the world by fire, is the startling assertion of Reverend Father Charles M. Charapin, one of the greatest living astronomers. Is that what he wrote in the Las Vegas paper? No. Absolutely not. But this is what the Associated Press decided to run, and the Associated Press fed hundreds and hundreds of newspapers across the United States. Now, remember, we're living in 1910. When we think about what are the media sources, what are our sources for information about what's going on in the world, there is your local newspaper, and probably if you're living in America in a small town, there's only one newspaper. There are magazines, usually published monthly, and there are books, but that's it. Radio exists, but not broadcast radio yet. No television, no internet, nothing else. So your information source is really going to be what you read in your morning newspaper. And if you were to pick up your morning newspaper and read this, how would you feel? One of the world's leading astronomers says, we're all going to die. You might be just a little unnerved by this. And of course, it didn't help that some editors were more than content to kind of build on those foundations and blow it up into an even larger story. This is from the Chicago Inter-Ocean. At the time, it was a very large Chicago paper, but it also had it was reprinted across the West. So you could read it in Chicago, but you could also get it out west as far as California, on the West Coast. So this story goes everywhere. Now, fortunately, this is pretty easy to debunk. And one of the examples of a debunker was Father Daniel McHugh, a professor of astronomy at DePaul University. McHugh argued on two grounds that this was just complete nonsense, what was being printed. He offered a scientific objection, which was quite simply, Seagrave has plotted the orbit. We know where the comet is going. Not only has he plotted, but it's been verified and confirmed by the world's leading astronomers. There's very little doubt about what the comet's going to do. And it's going to pass 13 million miles away. But he also offered, and I thought this was very interesting, a theological objection. And so quoting the same end of the world scenarios that Jesus had uttered, Christ ends that with this passage in Mark 13, but about that day or hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. So it is presumptuous for any human to say that the world is going to end. So he had a scientific objection to it and a theological objection, kind of wrapping it up into a nice, neat package. So actually the collision, it's going to come up again from time to time, but generally speaking, it was kind of a bright flare, but it flickered out with time. Others got a little bit more traction. Universal flood, what if the comet passing close to the Earth somehow caused a great epic flood that wiped us out? And you would say, well, why? Why would anybody think that? That seems a crazy idea, unlike all the others. On January 12, 1910, Comet A1910 appeared in the Northern Hemisphere. This was an extremely bright comet. It was 5 times as bright as Venus. And it had surprised everybody, caught everybody off guard. It actually came up from the Southern Hemisphere, approaching the Earth, and so it wasn't spotted till it was there, basically crossing into the Northern Hemisphere. And part of the reason is there just aren't many observatories in the Southern Hemisphere at this time. Actually, the comet was discovered by 3 South African miners who spotted it one night when they were getting off work and phoned the local newspaper that they saw a comet. But suddenly we see this huge comet blazing in the sky, and the first thing that many people, the conclusion they jump to is, it's Halley's comet. Somehow that comet has veered off course, taken a right turn in space, is now heading right at us. Well, astronomers could deal with that. They said, no, we can still see Halley's comet in our telescopes. It's not visible to the naked eye yet, but we can still see it. So it's not Halley's comet. In fact, it's that wonderful thing that sometimes happens where you get 2 amazing comets in one year. This is a scientific bonanza, essentially. So that's good. However, on January 20th, with this strange comet lighting the sky, the Seine River began to rise, especially as it flowed through Paris. And it rose and it rose. By January 25th, it had reached 25 feet above its normal level and continued to rise. On January 30th, it stopped rising at 30 feet 5 inches above its normal level. It was that close to washing over the levee that guards the Louvre and destroying the Louvre. That close, very close. It was one of the most catastrophic floods Paris had ever known. 1/3 of downtown Paris was underwater, as you can see from these photos. So they're floating around in boats and building boardwalks to get around. Why did you have this catastrophic event? Was the comet responsible, perhaps? Comet A1910? Now, this idea does have a bit of a scientific pedigree. Edmond Halley himself had for some time entertained the idea that maybe a comet was responsible for the Noah flood in Genesis. And so just as the moon pulls up a bulge of water, as we go circles, perhaps if a large comet flew very close to the Earth, it would pull up an immense bulge of water, and that would flood the Earth. Halley didn't reach a definitive conclusion about this possibility, but it was out there floating around as something that could happen, perhaps. A German astronomer named Henri Alexandre Delandre postulated a theory of cometary X-rays. So one thing I want to emphasize is we don't know a lot about comets in 1910. We don't know a lot. And so Delandre's theory was that the comet's tail is producing X-rays and ionizing radiation. And when that strikes the upper atmosphere, it coalesces water droplets, which turn into rain and storms and monumental delusions. So if Comet A1910 had caused flooding in Paris, what would happen when Halley's comet passed much closer? Would we all be wiped out in a second Noah's flood? This is Camille Flammarion, and we're going to talk about him quite a bit here in just a few minutes, but just bring him in here. Camille had a different theory. Rain caused the flood. And his theory is actually well-grounded and quite common sense, I would say. Flammarion said, if ionizing radiation is, making raindrops and causing floods, why is it only happening over Paris? Why isn't it doing it everywhere you can see the comet from the face of the Earth? And so he believed it was just a bad rainstorm, a bad January, essentially. But nevertheless, this one is out there. It's not as easily disproved because there are credible scientists who do believe that Delandre might be right, or his theory might have some potential. So it's kind of floating around out there. Brings us back to our poem. War, earthquakes, floods. Comets cause floods. Keep that in mind. The death ray. This is my favorite one, actually, I must say. The cosmic death ray was the brainchild of an amateur New York astronomer named Edmond Halley. And Halley believed that all the scientists, all the astronomers had it wrong about what the tail was. Most people thought it was gas. Didn't know how the gas got created, but gas was the dominant theory. He said, no, actually the head of the comet is gas, and it's shaped like a lens. So imagine a great magnifying glass flying through space, and when the sun strikes that head, it concentrates the beam of light, like a magnifying glass does. So if you spent your youth as misspent youth perhaps, and went out at recess and burned things with your magnifying glasses, you know how that works. And so if he is right, and the head is the lens, what this could mean is that when the comet's head passes between the Earth and the sun, it will scorch the Earth, just like a magnifying glass does at recess. Halley said, no, that's not true. The problem is, because it's a gaseous, lens-shaped creation, it's not able to concentrate light as accurately as a magnifying glass does. But what it will do is direct a beam of energy at the Earth. So it's not going to scorch the Earth, but it is going to funnel energy right at us, and this is going to alter weather patterns. So you get climatic upheavals, sudden reverses, and catalyze geological disturbances. So Halley predicted earthquakes, volcanic eruptions. He said if there were subterranean passages and underground caverns or mines that were filled with explosive gas, they would be triggered by this beam of energy striking them. But we're not going to get scorched, but other bad things will happen. Now, Halley is very fortunate in his predictions. Some people get lucky. And shortly after he issued his prediction, Mount Etna erupted. Massive, massive eruption. Now, if you know anything about Mount Etna on Sicily, you know it erupts all the time. It's always erupting. But it had been quiet, and then it blew up just shortly after he said this. There was also a massive earthquake in Costa Rica, and then in May, the rivers in France started to flood again as the comet approached. Was Halley right? Were we going to suffer from this huge energy beam? Now I've got two of them, right? Costa Rica earthquakes, check. Fourth hazard, and I will say this is the one that concerned the most people, asphyxiation. What happens when we pass through the tail of the comet, something we know is going to happen? Will we all suck in comet gases and die? Well, that brings us back to Camille Flammarion. Flammarion, how many of you have ever heard of Camille Flammarion? 2 people, 3 people. That's pretty good. Flammarion is arguably the most famous astronomer of his day, or he was at the time. As I wrote here, he's the French Carl Sagan. We've all heard of Carl Sagan, yes? Okay. Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan was an astronomer, of course, but he was also a gifted popularizer of astronomy and space-related things. And so, during his heyday, he was writing books, articles, and he was on every time, somebody shot a rocket up, there was Carl Sagan being interviewed and talking about things. But he was everywhere. He was a very popular, well-known astronomer. Flammarion was exactly the same at the end of the 19th, early 20th century. So he was a gifted astronomer himself. He'd done some pioneering pioneering work in double stars. He had done innovative work in meteorology, which was then believed to be related to astronomy. And then he was better known for being a popularizer. So he wrote many popular books intended for a wide general audience, explaining what astronomers were discovering, what they were learning about, and how how the universe fit together. He wrote many books. He also wrote newspaper articles, thousands of newspaper articles, I would guess, and magazine articles as well. So if you pulled somebody aside in 1910 and said, name one astronomer, 9 people out of 10 are going to name Camille Flammarion. He's just that huge. Everybody knows him. He is also, thanks to the events we're about to describe, on a collision course with a ruined reputation, and this is part of the reason why many of you have never heard of Camille Flammarion, okay? Because the newspapers are going to destroy him. He helped a little bit, I have to say. At the end of November 1909, he wrote an article for the New York Herald. So the New York Herald published in the United States, but it also had a big international edition as well. And this article was very typical of the sort of things that Flammarion wrote. It was a status update on where Halley's Comet is now, what it's doing, what we'd expect it to do, kind of for the general interest of general reader. So he did most of that work, and then near the end of his article, he kind of goes, he gets himself into trouble, actually. And it begins with this paragraph. From the mechanical, physical, chemical, and thermodynamic viewpoints, we may at once acknowledge that we know nothing of the fate reserved for us next May. The poisoning of humanity by deleterious gases is improbable. Now, I don't know about you, but I would really rather see impossible put in there. Improbable means unlikely, but still it could happen, right? Impossible, that's the word we want to stick in there, but it's not the one Camille Flammarion used. Flammarion is, giving him the benefit of the doubt, practicing proper scientific humility, our lack of knowledge before the mysteries of the universe. So we don't want to say dogmatically, it absolutely is not going to happen, but it's improbable, highly unlikely. And that's fine. If he had stopped there, it's at end of article, we're done, everything would have been fine. Unfortunately, he decided to indulge in a bit of a thought experiment. So it's highly improbable this is going to happen, but what if it did? Now, I put these ifs in red just to point them out, because this is a thought experiment. Doubtless, if the oxygen of the atmosphere combined with hydrogen of the comet's tail, it would mean universal death with short shrift. If, on the contrary, there resulted a diminution in the supply of nitrogen, the brain of every one of us would experience an unexpected sensation of physical activity, and the human race would come to a sudden and in a paroxysm of joys, universal delirium and madness at bottom, probably overjoyed at its fate. So it's going to kill you, but you're going to love dying. It's going to be great. Carbonic oxide, on the contrary, would cause universal poisoning of the lungs. So here are 3 possible scenarios. If these improbable events were to happen, this is what we might experience. This was the final paragraph. It followed that and it ended the story. Anxious minds have, however, no reason to be tormented uselessly too by these prognostications. Comet tails, it is true, are immense, but they are so light, so rarefied, that the terrestrial atmosphere is like lead in comparison. Even were our globe completely plunged into such a tail, we would, without doubt, be saved from a cataclysm by the atmospheric curtain which surrounds us. The comet might be compared to a fog through which a locomotive was dashing at full speed. That seems pretty clear, right? Of those 3 paragraphs, which one do you think the media decided to run with? Did you guess the middle one? Yes, you did. Actually, the British press got to this first. So they picked up this story and started printing it in Britain. This came out November 30th, December 1. They were all on top of it. The Manchester Guardian, becomes the London Guardian later. Camille Flammarion, who is been foretelling in the Paris edition of the New York Herald the dreadful things that may happen if the tail of Halley's Comet envelopes the Earth next year, has made a special study of the planet Mars. Flammarion frankly declares he cannot foretell the result of such a situation. When we pass through the comet's tail, partial destruction of humanity is possible. That's not right. He never said partial destruction. I mean, it's going to be all of us in this paroxysm of joy. So, yes, the British press got to it first, but it quickly spread across and hit America. And so we have this very strange story from the Washington Post on December 19th. And this is actually a report about the astronomers at Greenwich Observatory, who are delighted because they're seeing Halley's Comet. They're getting very excited about it. But they say, well, this must be one of Flammarion's paroxysms of joy already taking effect as the comet gas is starting to insinuate itself into the atmosphere. And it just kind of keeps running. Los Angeles Times, world ends in March, approximately. Flammarion prophecy works havoc with the ignorant. Many Europeans take it as gospel truth. Oakland Tribune, Earth calamity prophesied, and that's the way it's going to run. They're going to take this story, and papers from coast to coast in the United States are going to print that Camille Flammarion, one of the best known, if not the greatest astronomer, he's probably not the greatest astronomer, but he's certainly the most well known, is predicting imminent death to our planet. Flammarion, of course, quickly hears about what's going on. He tries to counter this. I would like, first of all, to warn the French and foreign journalists against a temptation to which they've already yielded, that of accusing me of announcing the end of the world for May 19th next. The end of the world will not occur on May 19th next. If you're confused about the dates, the comet's going to pass through the tail on May 18th in the United States and May 19th, morning of May 19th here on this side. Nevertheless, this is not going to stop the journalists. They're going to continue running this story. And so from basically November until the comet does pass, Flammarion is going to be held up as the person who is advocating very strongly that we're all going to die. And again, this is somebody with a very big reputation at this time. Well, this problem is exacerbated, in February 7th, 1910, astronomers at the Yerkes Observatory are doing spectrographic analysis of the comet's tail, trying to figure out what kind of gases are in there, and they discover cyanogen gas. Those of you who are not chemists may not recognize cyanogen gas. It is a close relative of cyanide. It is extraordinarily toxic. It's used in pesticides. It will kill you very quickly. It has a light blue color in its natural state, and it's said to smell of almonds. So if you suddenly start smelling almonds, be warned. You might be inhaling cyanogen gas. So here comes that tail, and lo and behold, it's got cyanogen gas in it. Well, things get a little worse. Professor Edwin Booth, professor of chemistry at University of California, Berkeley, grants an interview to the newspapers, and he says, if the astronomers are right in their estimations of the amount of cyanogen gas in the tail of Halley's Comet, and if that body's vapors do envelope the Earth, we may have a chance to fill the sensations of the bugs and insects which are killed by the use of this deadly gas as an exterminator. Isn't that charming? So here you have Camille Flammarion telling, or allegedly telling everybody we're going to die, and here comes the agent of our death. As I said, really from early spring right through May 18th, the newspapers are going to run these stories, and they will tend to do it. They will say, Flammarion is saying this, and then you'll have a kind of a counterpoint where a reputable scientist says, oh, that's all nonsense. But these are the stories that are circulating across the United States. In 1919, the fact that there's a 1919, this is the problem with the story. You all know what happened. We didn't die, right? So 1919 gives it away. It's a spoiler. I should put that somewhere else. Upton Sinclair was a famous American writer. He was kind of an early investigative journalist, I suppose you could say. He wrote a very famous work in the United States called The Jungle, which is an expose of the meatpacking industry in Chicago and all the nasty things they were putting into people's meat. He became very unpopular because of that. In 1919, he wrote a book called The Brass Check, which was an expose of his own business, journalism. And so he's asking the question, why do newspapers basically just lie to people? Why are they printing these things? And his answer was because newspapers, magazines are profit-generating entities. They must make a profit. How do you make a profit in the media business? You sensationalize the news. You scare people. You don't print nice, nothing really is happening today, so, some kids were playing in the playground. Oh, wonderful story. No, that's not what you do. You terrify people because then they want to read your newspaper to find out what happens next. The more people read your newspaper, the larger subscriber base you make, the more money you make from subscriptions, but more importantly, the more you can charge for your ads. The model hasn't changed. It works exactly the same today. Newspapers, television, the internet, does it all the same way. So Sinclair highlighted what he called 3 pernicious practices. Newspapers misrepresented the words and ideas of their subjects. Did Father Charles Charapin say we were going to die? No. Did the newspaper say we were? Yes. So they put these words in his mouth. Camille Flammarion, did he say we were going to die? No. But he was still used in that way. When they don't have somebody's words that they can twist or misrepresent, they just make up stories. And there were so many stories that were just fabricated out of complete and utter complete cloth here at this point. And then finally, they exaggerate the importance of stories. So the fact that newspapers focus on a story makes that story important. Right? In reality, the 1910 passage of Halley's Comet was an interesting science story. It didn't deserve to be page 1 news, as it was in the United States, especially the last week. Every newspaper was printing this on the front page, what's going to happen, what's going to happen. Right? It was just an interesting science story, but this obsessive interest elevates it. It turns a molehill into the mountain, as the old phrase goes. So these 4 doomsday scenarios that I've described receive extensive newspaper coverage, and they did probably increase publisher profits, but they produced rather predictable outcomes as well. Start with some of the fun ones, the Socratic calm, yes. So when people began to believe they were all going to die, they did take some defensive measures, and some of the ones that really intrigued me was in Berkeley, California, 3 men, one of whom was a submarine engineer, decided that the best thing to do would be to ride out the storm in a submarine. And so like Jules Verne in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, they decided to build a second Nautilus, although they were going to call their ship the Berkeley in honor of their hometown. And what they would do is a couple days before the comet, before we started through the tail, they would load their friends and family aboard, submerge, sit at the bottom of the ocean for a few days until the cyanogen gas dissipated, then resurface and happily go about their lives. Well, there are some obvious problems with this plan. First of all, they announced it in early April, and the comet was passing on May 18th. So that's not a lot of time to build a big submarine like the Nautilus. I would wager that there's no shipyard on Earth today who could do it in 45 days. So that was a problem. But the other problem they experienced is when the plan was announced, their neighbors started petitioning for places on the submarine. They wanted a seat in the submarine. And of course, the submarine is finite in size. You can't take all the people who were wanting to clamber aboard. And this created a lot of animosity when they had to start turning people away. So much so they decided to just ultimately abandon the plan, probably because of the impracticality of the plan as well. But that was an innovative possibility. Excuse me. Another one, I think this is a bit more practical, was the idea of constructing an underground gas shelters. So John Marlowe, a farmer from Council Bluff, Iowa, began digging an underground shelter behind his farmhouse. And it was going to be large enough to shelter his family, 2 horses, 2 cows, a dog, a cat, and a number of chickens. So once the gas dissipated, he and his family would come out and they would repopulate the earth. On kind of the opposite end of the spectrum was a man named Stephen Harder of Pasadena, California. He was also building a fallout shelter or a gas shelter. But it was only going to be big enough for one person, him, and some food. Because Stephen didn't want the rest of the humanity to survive, and he thought it'd be a much finer earth if only he survived and lived as a hermit for the rest of his days. So there were a number of people who started burrowing out of the earth, hoping to avoid the comet. When you have this level of anxiety, of course, you're going to get people preying on the anxious, and so con men had a field day. The production and sale of gas masks to ward off cyanogen was a big business. 3 men in Houston, Texas were arrested for selling fake gas masks, as most of them were. And when the police disassembled the gas canisters, they found they were just stuffed with straw, which probably wouldn't stop much gas along the way. Down in Haiti, there was a famous voodoo doctor who said he had created a comet pill. And if you took it, it would ward off cyanogen gas. The trick was you had to take 2 a day, and they were very expensive. Nevertheless, people were lined up down the street to purchase his pills. In Los Angeles, a man was selling Comet life insurance policies. So for 50 cents a week, you could buy a policy that would pay $500 if you were killed by a comet. You had to be killed by a direct comet strike for it to pay off. And of course, there is the obvious problem that if a comet strikes, it's going to be hard to find those beneficiaries. But nevertheless, there was, you could insure yourself, insure your lack of a future in that case. One of the ones that intrigued me most was in New York. The saloon keepers said, we have discovered that alcohol denatures cyanogen gas. So their solution was go into your local pub, have the bartender on that night line up a row of tumblers, fill them with scotch, and just calmly keep sipping all night long, and you'll be fine. Okay, so that was a possibility. On the other hand, there was what I would call predictable tragedy. So with the constant barrage of these news stories, it's going to work on people. You get cases of temporary insanity. Fred Bowers of Orville, Ohio, he was a farmer in Orville. And in early May, he announced to his creditors, we're all going to be wiped out on May 18th, so I don't see any point in paying my bills. I'll just take the money and just have a splurge, right? Well, his creditors were not happy with that. They reported him to the police arrested him. And when Fred began railing in the jail that we're all going to die, they had psychiatrists come in and examine him, and he was remanded to the state mental hospital. So a lot of people, yes, they had breakdowns from the pressure. You also had, I think this is a marvelous story, cases of extreme contrition. So in New Jersey, a man named Luigi Chiaffici, he was a member of the Italian Black Hand, a local mafia offshoot. He walked into a police station early in the afternoon of May 18th. Now remember, May 18th is when the comet's coming. And he confessed to the murder of another man named Patrick Cahill. And the police were just, they couldn't believe it. Cahill had just vanished 10 days earlier, but nobody knew what happened to him. Did he just go away? Did he move to another town? They didn't even really suspect there was a crime that had been committed. But Chiaffici said, nope, I killed him, and then I buried him beneath my pig pen. And when they went and dug up the pig pen, sure enough, there was Cahill's body. And when pressed, why did you confess to the perfect crime? He said, because I know we're all going to die tonight. And if I die with this terrible sin on my conscience, God will not forgive me. So the only way to have a chance at heaven in the next life is to confess here on earth. So extreme contrition. And then, of course, much sadder were the number of suicides. So a lot of people killed themselves rather than risk the terror of asphyxiation in the comet's tail. First person to kill herself in America was a young woman named Ruby Woolfield of Yakima, Washington. She had just had a baby a couple months earlier, and her neighbors later reported that she had become obsessive about the comet. So she read the newspapers continuously and was just obsessing about it. On the morning of April 5th, she handed the baby to her husband and said, I'm going to go check the mail. You watch the baby. She was gone for about an hour, and her husband started to worry. That's a long time to go check the mail. And when we walked out of the house, he saw her standing down on the banks of the Yakima River. He looked away for a moment. Then when he turned back, she was gone. Went down to the river, and she'd left a note saying she can't bear to live any longer with the comet coming. And she threw herself in the water and drowned. So she was the first American suicide. She was by no means the last of them. I'm going to put suicides and insanity or temporary insanity under dire things, so we can add that to the scorecard. The Earth passed through the comet's tail on May 18, 1910. It didn't harm the planet. As we all know, here we are. Well, this has been a bit of an Americentric story, and I'm sure many of you are wondering, well, that's all fine, but what about here in Britain? Did irrationality prevail here, or rationality? What do you think? Irrationality? Nobody. Oh, a couple of people. Rationality? Everybody's going for rationality. Okay, well, having looked at a lot of British newspapers as well, I would say you could characterize, kind of fall into a few classes. Interesting science story. A lot of newspapers will run stories about, the interesting science behind Halley's comet. So this is probably proportionally the largest, section of them would fall under the science story qualification. You get stories like this. So Professor Herbert Turner, Oxford professor, on May 4th, 1910, gave the 1910 Alderwood Lecture for the Royal College of Arts, and he said, it's unlikely we'll see any sort of effect whatsoever from the tail. He did have some interesting tail theories. He said that as we pass through the comet's tail, we may have electrical disturbances, strange things with our power. He also believed that the comet's tail is always present. So we now know that it goes away when it's away from the sun, but he thought it was just because the way it pointed out, streamed out behind, and we couldn't see it from the Earth. So we thought there was always a comet's tail. He thought it also carried meteors in the tail. So we might see a few meteors flashing around us as we pass through the tail. And he also had this very strange theory that the tail is made up of reconstituted or recondensed solar ejecta. So it gathers ejecta, things that are spewed out from the sun, and reprocesses it in some way. And that's what the comet's tail is. As I said, there's considerable controversy about what a comet's tail is. This is a common theme in British stories, especially in May, poking fun at foreigners. Okay. So there's a lot of, a lot of nations come under the critical eye. Italy in this story, on the story on the left, talking about the Italians going nuts, but the French also are apparently going nuts. The Germans, some of the German peasants are going nuts. India, Russia, the Chinese, pretty much everybody in the world except Britain is going nuts over fear of the comet. But I think there is a broad consensus that America is way out there. And as in the final days before the comet arrived, there was this was a series actually of the strange things that were being said in America. I love this. America has cometitis. Half the space in every newspaper is devoted to the observations of distinguished astronomers on your side of the Atlantic as well as on this, while the other half describes the lay attitude towards the approach of the heavenly traveler. Fantastic incidents are everywhere being attributed to the comet. Rural correspondents are flooding the wires with tales of poultry laying and cackling after midnight under the mystic spell of the celestial visitor. Barnyard animals sit all night long on fences, watching for the comet and pointing it out to their progeny. And every time I read that sentence, how many of you know Gary Larson's The Far Side cartoons with his wonderful animals? And I just see a line of Gary Larson's cows sitting on a barbed wire fence and pointing it out with their hooves towards the, I don't know what that one's about. In fact, the comet story, especially in May, is not going to get a lot of traction because another story blew it completely out of the papers. Somebody know what that story was? May 1910? Nope. Mm. King Edward VII died on May 6, 1910. And the British press went almost wall to wall, front to back, with funeral coverage. Okay, so he lay in state May 14th and 19th, funeral on May 20th. And any Comet stories, if you go and look at the papers, you'll have 13 pages of King coverage and then a Comet story near the back. However, the death of King Edward raises the interesting possibility, did the comet kill him? So it's not entirely rational, is it? Okay. Yep. So there is there evidently is some belief in Britain that perhaps the comet had killed him. And, well, who knows? Death to kings is certainly one of the things that we see. All right. That brings me to the end of Fear and Loathing in the Heavens. Couple things to point in your direction is, of course, we do have this fine book, Comet Madness, which has many, many, many more stories than I've had time to cover tonight. So that's out there. The other thing is I did put a sign-up sheet back by the coffee and the biscuits. And if you sign your name and email address on that, I will add you to my monthly newsletter, which comes out talking about different things, mostly history, travel related, and other projects that I'm working on. So if you're at all interested in that, sign up. If you hate it, you can just unsubscribe, as soon as you start to loathe it. So that's out there as well. If you are watching over the internet, you can go to my website, richardjgoodrich.com, and do exactly the same thing. Otherwise, I think we're ready for, if we want to do a few questions. I don't know how we're doing on time.
Well, first of all, I think we should thank Dr. Goodrich for a fascinating talk. And given what I was saying earlier about us entering our 100th year, I think that was very timely discussion on what our contemporaries might have had to put up with, shall we say, in the early 20s when they were down the pub and setting up the society. So let's open the floor to questions.
When's Halley coming back? When is Halley coming back?
Halley's Comet will return in 2061. And so actually in December of this year, it makes its turn, starts heading back. Yep. So just a couple months. There's a question back there.
Was there yet much of a following for popular science magazines such as Scientific American?
There was, yeah. Popular science as a discipline or as a publication project was very popular at that time. There was so much technological progress happening in those centuries. End of the 19th, 20th century was just a fluorescence, essentially, of amazing things happening. And so magazines, Scientific American being the preeminent one, but you'd also see newspapers would often have a lot of science coverage as well. And so people ate it up.
Hi, thank you. Not so much a question as a comment. We're very fortunate here. We get some excellent speakers, and they deal with some technical subjects and some scientific subjects, and some are easy to follow and some are not. But there's an ability which you have with other people, I can think, that just light it up. You sort of light up our October evenings with proper research, but with a different slant. And for that, I thank you deeply. We've had some excellent talks in the same vein, and it really does brighten our year and brighten our talk. So thank you.
I can't take all the credit. That's the result of a proper St. Andrews education. Okay. share screen again. Oh, they're back.
Hello, Radam. Have you got questions in the chat? We can't hear them, can we? Hello, Radam. Are you there?
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
If you've got any questions, just hold on a second because you're a bit loud coming all the way from far Eastern Europe.
Yeah. So just let me know if you can hear me now.
That's fine. Carry on.
Very well. Firstly, thank you for the very interesting talk. And I'm afraid we don't have any question in Zoom. Oh, we do. Tosh would like to ask something. Tosh?
Yeah, thank you very much for that talk. It was absolutely fascinating. Were there any similar goings on in the more recent arrival of Halley's comet in 1986? Was there similar things going on, or had it all quietened down by then?
No, in 1986, Halley's comet bored everybody to death. Those of you who were around, like I was, know exactly what I'm talking about. It was supposed to be this amazing comet, that had terrified generations of humanity, and it was a damp fizzle, basically.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's it from Zoom.
Okay.
How did we get on with YouTube, Peter? Did we get that up and running? No.
What we're going to do is we've recorded it, everything, we're going to get it right out on YouTube.
Okay, so if there are no more questions, let's thank Dr. Goodrich again. And next up, I think we have Nigel for the sky in October. Thank you.
Not yet. Just need something comes up. Okay, can everybody hear me all right? Good stuff. How's that? That's not what I want. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Goodrich, for a fascinating talk. I'm hoping this talk will be equally enlightening for you, but looking at the weather outside, I was tempted to start the whole talk with a slide that just said, "Don't bother," but I'm not allowed to get away with that. So, the sky in October. Okay, we could argue, is this the best time of year? We've got decreasing day length and increasing darkness. So we're perhaps starting a bit earlier in the evening, getting our equipment out into back gardens and elsewhere to start our astronomy. And we've got increasing astronomical dark, as you can see from this table, as sunset gets earlier and earlier in the evening towards the end of the month. But also because it's October, because it's still autumn and not winter, it's not quite so freezing cold out there for those of us who like to stand actually out at telescopes rather than sit in their nice cozy kitchen tables with computers like me. So arguably it's the best time of the year, and it's the beginning of really a whole cornucopia of astronomical events. The stars are becoming much more, deep sky objects are becoming much more easy to see because we are getting much darker skies. And the Milky Way, of course, as you can see from this lovely image from Andrew Farrow, which was taken, I think, at Calendar, arches over the sky from east to west during the night, and is quite prominent in darker areas. So we've got a wealth of targets being revealed by darkening skies. As you saw from my opening slide, the Andromeda Galaxy is well placed. Galaxies like the Triangulum Galaxy are also well placed. And also trickier subjects, the Great Square of Pegasus is still there in the evening sky and quite high up. So trickier targets like Stephan's Quintet that we saw the James Webb telescope take a absolutely fascinating picture of, is there for those of us with the requisite equipment to perhaps have a go at imaging. Other constellations that are here because they're autumnal constellations and are here in addition to the circumpolar constellations that we have all year round, that might be worth a look with some perhaps some suggestions for some targets within those. Pisces and the M74 galaxy, which I think is the Phantom Galaxy. The Helix Nebula in Aquarius. Aquila, the Eagle, is still reasonably high above the horizon to the southeast. And there's a nice planetary nebula in Aquila, NGC 6781. And in Cetus as well, which is quite well placed for astronomy. You've got NGC 247, which is a face-on galaxy. So looking north, we can see that there you have I don't know if you can see my cursor, you can see the arch of the Milky Way going from east to west. You can see the arch of the Milky Way going across the sky, and Ursa Major is quite low, but it's still within shooting distance, as it were. Hercules, although edging towards the western horizon now, but it's still high up in the sky, as is Draco, Ursa Minor, and all of those, the beautiful area for galaxies under the handle of the plough, Canis Venatici, and Bootes is again sinking into the northwest with Corona Borealis. High in the sky, we still have Cygnus, Lacerta, Triangulum, Aries, and Taurus. And looking south, as I mentioned before, the Great Square of Pegasus is high overhead. We've got Cetus to the lower to the south, Aquarius, Capricornus, if you've got a good horizon to the southwest, is still in view. Little constellations that we miss out sometimes, like Delphinius and Equilaeus, are in there, and Aquila, the Eagle, because the Summer Triangle is still with us. Taurus and Orion, as any of you who've been up and about in the early morning, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, Taurus and Orion are beginning to feature in the night sky as we move towards full winter. We're getting some wonderful images from Spain, and this was just to sort of illustrate how even with this bad weather in this autumnal season, we're still able to, with our new facility in Spain, we're getting some lovely images here of the Jellyfish Nebula, M31 from Eros Tang, and the Eagle Nebula from Mark, M16. The solar system in October, we can see from this graphic that the Mercury and Venus are, I beg your pardon, Mercury and the Moon during the middle part of the month are out of the way. Mercury and Mars are really, Mars is on the other side of the Sun, and Mercury, although it might be just about spottable in the very early dawn, but it's very, very low. And although bright, it's coming to quite close to the Sun now as well. So effectively, those two planets are out of sight. Not the case, however, for the other major planets. Jupiter is a grand sight in the night sky at the moment as it approaches its opposition, which is early next year. And Saturn too is visible, not quite as bright as Jupiter. Jupiter's very bright just now. And Uranus and Neptune are both objects that you can find with a small telescope or binoculars. And Venus itself, rising in the early morning as the month wears on, will be a brilliant object for those of us who are still up and about at 3 and 4 in the morning. So Venus rises as the month goes on. Venus will be rising about 4 hours ahead of the Sun, and so that gives us plenty of time to take a look. It reaches its greatest western elongation from the Sun, 46 degrees, on the 23rd of October. You'll be able to discern quite a strong phase. It will move from 36% illuminated, in other words, a sort of fattish waxing crescent, to over 54% by the end of the month. So it will be expanding towards a full disk. So we've got a lovely photograph here from Robert Arnold recently of Venus. So in moderate-sized telescopes, it should be quite easy to get as long as you're up at the early hours. Mars and Mercury, as we've already said, Mars very close to the Sun and is so effectively out of sight this month, and Mercury very low and passing through superior conjunction on the 20th of October. So in other words, it'll be absolutely on the other side of the Sun from where the Earth is. Jupiter, close to its best this month, as I said, moving towards opposition in the early part of next year. It will reach 49 degrees elevation from Edinburgh at 3 a.m. in the morning, and at the moment it's absolutely brilliant at minus 2.9, and makes quite a sight in the night sky when we don't have clouds. There'll be a number of transits over the face and appearances of the red spot. As you know, Jupiter rotates quite quickly, so you'll be able to see both of those kinds of phenomena through this month with Jupiter, as well as the cloud bands. There's amongst many other transits, there's a transit of Io and its shadow on the 20th of October, about 11 p.m. at night. So you should be able to observe and photograph or just watch the moon Io as it crosses across the front of Jupiter. It's in Aries at the moment, and it's close to Uranus, so which is lying in the eastern part of the same constellation in Aries. So the two are quite close together. And this is a nice image of Jupiter taken recently by Mark. Saturn will achieve a reasonable altitude this month in the late evening, and it will brighten to about 0.6 of a magnitude, plus 0.6, which is quite bright, certainly a naked eye object. It ends the month in the early evening sky. It's in Aquarius and it's close to Neptune. So it's a signpost to Neptune, which is on the Pisces Aquarius boundary, the boundary between those two constellations. And this is another nice image taken, oops, to go back a bit. Sorry, I'll find out who the author of that image was. I think that was Mark as well. Okay, so the moon in October, these are the dark of the moon is more or less the middle of the month. Today is the moon is in its last quarter, and we're getting to the new moon on October the 14th. The first quarter is on October the 22nd, and we have full moon on October the 28th. So obviously, if you're a moon person, you can see the times when you're likely to get good views of the moon, because it's quite high in the sky at the moment. And if you are a deep sky person, you know when to avoid the moon. The background image on this slide is by John, and I don't know who John is, but aha, there's John there. So that was one of his excellent pictures of the lunar surface. There's a partial lunar eclipse visible in Europe at about 8:30 British summer time on the 28th of October. And it's caused, of course, by the moon passing through the penumbral and the umbral shadow created by the Earth, because the Earth will come between the sun and the moon. And in the Americas, there is an annular solar eclipse, not an annual solar eclipse, an annular solar eclipse, which means that the moon will pass in front of the sun, but will not hide the disk of the sun completely. So you get the famous ring of fire effect. And that will take place on the 14th of October, covering North America, Central and South America. So if any of you are traveling to any of these parts, this is the route of totality. So it will come on shore, as it were, in the Pacific Northwest of North America, travel across the western states of America, and across the Gulf of Mexico into the Yucatan, down through Central America, cross right across Amazonia, and exit into the Atlantic. And it should be quite a fine sight, quite a precursor to the full solar eclipse, which will take place in America in April, I think it is, next year. Meteor showers. The Orion meteor shower, which we have annually, will peak on the 21st, the night of the 21st, 22nd of October. And interestingly enough, it's the remains of the tail of Comet Halley that will be passing through, which causes the Orion meteor shower. The radiant will be very easy to spot because it will be just off the right arm of Orion as he raises his club or his sword in order to whack the bull or in Taurus on the head. And it's, although not the best meteor shower of the year, it's certainly one of it's up there with the good ones. The moon will be almost first quarter, but it sets around 11 o'clock at night. So through a good part of the night, it should be dark, and you will get to see lots of meteors, hopefully, something with a zenith hourly rate of up to about 20-25 meteors per hour, streaking from that radiant, and of course from other parts of the sky as well. There are other minor showers coming up in October. On the 6th, you have the Draconid meteor shower. On the 10th, the southern Taurids, based around the constellation of Taurus, and towards the end of the month, the northern Taurids. Comets, since we've been talking a lot about comets this evening. Comet 103P Hartley, commonly known as Comet Hartley 2, will be paying us a visit. It should be bright and high all month. It might reach a magnitude of plus 8.5, which is respectable for a comet. But comets are tricky things, and sometimes, as Richard pointed out, they fizzle out, and other times they don't. It's just a bit of a guessing game. This picture was taken by a NASA's deep impact spacecraft in 2010 when it flew within 700 kilometers of the comet, which is rather peanut shaped and about 2 kilometers long. So a pretty hefty object. If it struck the Earth, it would certainly cause havoc, but it's not going to. You can quote, no, don't quote me on that. Thank goodness I'm not a respected scientist, otherwise I probably would be quoted. And it's going to travel out of Perseus through Auriga and down through Gemini through the most of this month. So if you're looking towards Gemini, that's where you'll find the comet making its way. Interestingly enough, because of the shape of the comet, a lot of scientists believe that it was two rocks which basically collided and with gravitational attraction managed to lump together and have stayed that way. This is a picture by Ramsay of said comet. Other comets coming up in October are 2P Encke, which will reach perihelion on October the 22nd at magnitude 7.3. Its closest approach to Earth will be September next year, and when it will be magnitude 9.9, and it's observable throughout the northern hemisphere. And 62P Sushinshan, which will reach perihelion on December the 25th, magnitude 7.2. Its closest approach to Earth will be in January of next year. And that, from me, is all that I have for you. So thank you, and clear skies.
Excellent, thanks Nigel. And I think you've just ensured that we're going to get decent weather all month. Thank you. So we'll finish off the presentation part of the evening with the image of the quarter winner's announcement. And Pat Clough and I are going to do this in tandem without the aid of a safety net. So given the challenges we've had with technology this evening, we might be tempting fate, but let's give it a go. It's all right, I'm just trying to get this slide deck sorted. So let's start with a reminder of Pat's winning image from the previous quarter. And at this point, I will ask the ether, are you there, Pat?
I'm here, if you can hear me. Hello, can you hear me?
We're just working on the volume, Pat.
Hear me okay, Pat?
I can hear you.
I think we can hear you fine now. Just
Okay. Well, shall I do a quick
take it away, Pat?
Hello. Pat Devine's.
everybody's not muted. Could you make sure everybody's muted, please? Well, somebody's got the telly on.
Hope it wasn't Pat.
Just trying to make sure that it's not mine. Probably was.
Yeah, go for it, Pat.
Right, well, entry of 6 for this quarter. So to start off with the Northern Lights, I'm really just very jealous of this, because I've even made several trips to Scotland to see the Northern Lights. I've succeeded on a couple of occasions, but nothing as good as this. There are several problems I have with, not with this slide, but generally with Scotland. It's supposed to be this cloudy, damp place. But I see all these marvelous pictures coming out of club members, and all I get is grey sky, cloud. So what more can I say about this excellent picture? I really love it. The next one I think was Jupiter. Well, I'm looking forward to having a go at this later in the year, probably in a couple of months' time. Certainly from my home in London. My own house shuts off the eastern view. I get quite a good western view, but I also get quite good turbulence, of course, from London. So whether I'll be able to get out of London often enough to have a fair chance of competing with this, time will tell. We'll see what I can enter. Next one, please. Well, Mr. Eros Tang, I think we all know him very well because there's a steady stream of amazing pictures from him. He really must have some fancy system going for his processing to actually get through them so quickly. Always quite amazing. But on this occasion, I'm afraid he hasn't quite made the grade for me. Next one. I'm pleased to say that this is my number one. I think this is really quite amazing, and mainly because it's an entirely different view of the Wizard Nebula. So much so that I really felt I need to double check to make sure that it was really what I thought it was and what it's claimed to be. And I did convince myself that it is, but certainly an entirely different view of this nebula. And I think, Mr. Smith, it's well worth your first prize. Next one. Mr. Tang at it again. Well, congratulations, Eros. An impressive volcano. I think this is really great fun, and I'm surprised I've not seen many pictures like this over time in the past, but I think this is really great fun. Congratulations. Thank you very much. Was this in the entry?
Say it again, Pat, sorry.
Was this one in the entry?
It was indeed, yes. Shall I move on to the next one? And I think you've announced the winner, but Ian, congratulations. So I think from the entries there, although they were smaller in number than perhaps previous quarters, I can imagine that Pat had just as difficult a job choosing the winner. And all I can say is I'm glad it wasn't my turn to pick the winner. So I think 2 entries each from Eros, Ian, and Mike. 6 amazing images. So congratulations, gentlemen. In my eyes, you're all winners. Ian, I'll be in touch about your prize. And that concludes the, oh, you moved. That concludes the formal presentations for this evening. Thanks for sticking with us as we fought our way through the technical bad weather. And coffee and tea and biscuits are served at the back of the room. Thanks again. Yeah, go for it.